What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's Game Week 14 transfer tips. So we're going to go through some of the popular players being transferred in and out of our FPL squads, and we're going to discuss whether they're good moves or not. If you enjoy this video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you're new around here. And we're going to start off with Zaha, who's been sold by over 90,000 FPL managers already this week, ahead of Southampton at home, which is obviously a pretty nice fixture. And Crystal Palace's fixtures are pretty decent right up until the World Cup. From an attacking perspective, playing West Ham away is not necessarily ideal because they have defended very well so far this year. But that fixture is sandwiched between Southampton and Nottingham Forest, and they are both two good fixtures. And I think Zaha is in the same position he has been since game weeks 9 and 10, which is why I really like the idea of bringing him into our squads. That if you've got other stuff to deal with, he's always got another pretty decent fixture, and you're not going to have to worry about him because he's always going to play. He's usually going to get pretty decent minutes, and he's on penalties. Now, I will say there are a lot of penalty takers in this league, and some of them you're just not necessarily confident when they step up. I actually think Mitrović is one of those players. I don't think he's that great of a penalty taker, but obviously he's always going to keep them because he is just their main man. Zaha's kind of similar. When he steps up for a penalty, there is a little bit of doubt. You know, when Kane or Salah or someone like that steps up, or even Haaland as well, of course, you expect them to score pretty much every single time. Zaha maybe not quite so much, but it is something he's got in his locker. And I think when we discuss players on this video and on other videos during the week, sometimes there's players that you absolutely have to sell, or at least I feel like you do, or there's players you absolutely have to look at bringing in. I think Zaha's somewhere in the middle where 90,000 FPL managers, have they made a mistake? Probably not, because they're looking to go to Saka. Now, his fixtures are arguably worse, I would say, than Crystal Palace's on paper, because Nottingham Forest at home looks really good this week, but Southampton is probably comparable. I think Nottingham Forest is the easier fixture, but Southampton's not necessarily far behind. And then Arsenal played Chelsea away and then Wolves away, whereas Palace have got West Ham away, Nottingham Forest away. So I think fixture difficulty-wise is quite similar, but Saka is playing in a team that you'd expect to score lots of goals, or more goals than Crystal Palace, I would say, especially against Nottingham Forest at home, because at home, Arsenal have been brilliant so far this year. And also, his underlying numbers are a little bit better. So I think anyone that's gone Zaha to Saka, that's a pretty good move, and I'm still considering doing that this week, even though I don't really want to let go of Zaha, getting the two mixed up there. So 90,000 FPL managers not necessarily made a mistake, because I think Zaha to Saka is still a pretty good move. I don't know if there's many other £8 million-ish midfielders that I would move to this week. Like even Foden, and obviously you have to keep an eye on price changes and stuff like that. Like I still think Foden's a great option up until game week 16. I've got him in my squad, but if you don't already own him, you can probably now put that move off until game week 15 when they got those two home fixtures against Fulham and Brentford, whereas this week it's Leicester away. Now I fully expect Man City to go and score, but I don't think Zaha is a massively worse option against Southampton at home. So it's all going to come down to priorities. If your team is looking pretty good, then you can probably look to move him on to Saka or someone else if you want to. If you've got other stuff to deal with, like in my team, for example, Solanke has now gone and got injured. We don't know how long he's out for. I may have to deal with that. I've got Danny Ward in goal against Man City. I could make a goalkeeper transfer. There's at least other things for me to think about. It may be that I still end up doing Zaha to Saka anyway, but I have got other things in my team that I might need to deal with. And if you're in the same situation, you could just keep him for Southampton at home, then reassess for game week 15. So not saying people have made a mistake, but it's perfectly reasonable to keep him as well. So it feels like every single week, when I look at the most transferred in defenders, Saliba is always right up there. He's been brought by nearly 87,000 FPL managers so far this week. I'm sure that will climb closer to 100,000 by the time we get to the deadline. And I guess there's two things to talk about. One, is it worth bringing in an Arsenal defender this week? And two, is Saliba the best option in that team? Because obviously they've got Gabriel as well, Ben White too. You can even look at Ramsdale in goal, but obviously I appreciate people that are bringing in Saliba need a different defender, right? So first of all, let's talk about the Arsenal thing. I think it really depends on which other defenders you've already got in your team and how much money you've got to spend. So I still really rate Cancelo as an option. I know he conceded against Brighton, no attacking returns, but Leicester away, Fulham at home, Brentford at home is a pretty nice end of season run. So if you've got the money, I think Cancelo is a better option than the Arsenal defenders. Obviously Trippier as well, but I think at this point most people that are going to get Trippier already own him. They've got two nice fixtures in game weeks 14 and 15. I think it's Villa at home, and then we'll just double check the other one. Villa, Southampton away, yes, and then Chelsea at home, which is not necessarily ideal, but Trippier's playing so well so far this year, and so in Newcastle. I'm not even that worried about having to play him against Chelsea. So if you've got Cancelo and Trippier, there's not a huge amount of other defenders to look at bringing in this week. Like Zuma is someone that I like for West Ham. He got his goal and clean sheet last night. I've talked about him quite a lot, but this week they play Man United away, and I could see them conceding in that game. I think Zuma is someone you might look to bring in for game weeks 15 and 16, but if you're looking at getting someone in this week, I would probably prioritise an Arsenal defender instead. The only other team is Liverpool, but I know that everyone's kind of really down on them right now, and probably rightly so. They continue to concede chances, and look, they could get something against Leeds at home and Southampton at home. It doesn't even have to be Trent. It could be Van Dijk or Robertson instead if you want, but if you haven't got the money, I really wouldn't be worrying about trying to get it to bring one of them in. I would just look at an Arsenal defender instead. So I like bringing them in this week. Ideally, you would bench them in game week 15 because it's not a great fixture against Chelsea away. The Arsenal defence has been very good, and the Chelsea attack maybe not really setting the world alight just yet, but still, an away game to Chelsea is always going to be difficult, but having to play them in 14 and 16 looks pretty good. So in general, with all the other things I've said, I do like bringing in an Arsenal defender this week. I don't like bringing in Saliba though. He's now more expensive than Gabriel. He's 5.2 million. Gabriel is a little bit cheaper, and I know he scored the most points so far in that Arsenal defence, but it's not like it's a huge difference, right? And I know a lot of people will be looking at using points in total as a reason to bring a player in, but if we look at the defenders, like he scored 53, Ben White's only 6 behind, and then Gabriel's only 7 behind, right? So it's not like it's a huge difference. And I think from set pieces, Gabriel is just more of a threat than any of those other Arsenal defenders. And he's not on 4 yellow cards. Now, I know in 3 games, like it might be unlikely that Saliba's going to get a yellow and get suspended. And obviously, if he gets through the Forest and Chelsea games, then he's definitely going to play that game against Wolves away. But I just don't know if it's worth taking that risk, especially when he's more expensive as well. So in general, I like the idea of bringing in an Arsenal defender this week if you need a defender transfer, but for me, if you're spending 5.2 million, I would just spend 0.1 million less and get Gabriel instead, or if you really need to save money, Ben White's a good option too. So he scored 6 goals so far this season. He's sitting at 5.6 points per match. It's time to talk about Almirón, give him some recognition. Plus, he's been brought in by nearly 400,000 FPL managers. So I can't even avoid talking about him if I wanted to. And I want to discuss something I mentioned on yesterday's video, I think it was, about enablers and how we don't really need them because there's so much cash to go around. No one's in a rush to get like Trent and Robertson and Salah and expensive players like that. But I think I was wrong in what I said, because when I look at my team, I'm sat with Solanke in it, who's a 5.7, pretty much an enabler for the rest of the team, and you could be looking at having a 5.4 million midfielder instead in Almirón. Plus, some people have got 3 premium setups, so they have Salah, Kane and Haaland, or maybe De Bruyne instead of Salah as well. I've seen some teams with Andreas and Bailey, and they're kind of rotating a little bit, so it doesn't cost that much more to go to Almirón. So I think it's unfair to just write him off as an option because nobody needs an enabler when some people do, and I have one in my team, just so happens to be a forward. And I think if you look at the options around the 5.4 million price point, he probably is the best option, and his underlying numbers are looking pretty good. 0.33 expected goals per 90, 0.07 expected assists. Obviously, it's not going to be as high as the likes of Mitrović or Kane or Haaland or Salah, etc., but he doesn't cost anywhere near that much. So for 5.4 million, with Villa at home, Southampton away up next, they're pretty good fixtures. I think if you get to game week 16 and you have to play him, so be it. It's not ideal, but you don't really care. It's the last week. He's only 5.4 million, maybe a little bit more expensive by then. It's okay. And I know now, obviously, Villa, new manager coming in and stuff like that, and they performed really well against Brentford, and that's all, you know, things to consider. But Newcastle have been very good so far this season, so that Villa fixture would not put me off at all, and Southampton's always a pretty decent team to play against. And if we look at the kind of other options in the midfield for, I don't know, let's say kind of 5.8 or less, I mean, he's right up there as the highest point scorer. You've got Xhaka, who maybe we need to give a little bit of consideration to. 3 goals and 3 assists so far this year, but he's going to block an Arsenal spot, and I think a lot of people probably already on 2, maybe want to get a 3rd one in. I'm not sure Xhaka is the one to go for, but you could definitely consider him because he's done so well. You've got Gross, who's okay. Chelsea at home this week, then Wolves away, Villa at home. Overall, the next 3 fixtures are not that much worse than Newcastle's, but I'm not sure anyone's really looking at him right now. And most people already have Andreas Pereira in there. Bailey is someone else we could look at now as well. I think the most comparable one because of the fixtures will probably be Eze. Southampton at home, West Ham away, Nottingham Forest away. You could possibly consider him instead. But right now, the way he and Newcastle are playing, I think if you're looking to spend kind of 5.5 or below, you maybe can't go wrong going for someone like Almirón. I cannot believe, even in game week 14, we're talking about Almirón. Again, it just feels like this. I won't say this season's been crazier than others because stuff like this always happens. There's always a player you're not expecting to get points that does. But no one was telling me in pre-season that we were all going to be discussing Almirón in game week 14. But that's the way this season has gone so far. If you move the budget up a little bit, let's say 7.3 million. To be fair, Almirón has still scored the most points. He's having an exceptional season. Trossard is definitely someone you could consider, especially depending on when you need to make the move. If you need to make it this week, maybe you don't bring him in against Chelsea at home, although he scored against Man City, but he's still a pretty nice option for that money. Most people have already got Martinelli at this point. I don't really like Bernardo as an option, especially when he blocks off 3 other Man City, Haaland, Cancelo, Foden, De Bruyne, etc. I wouldn't spend that money on Bernardo. We've already talked about Xhaka. The only other one is Rashford, who I mentioned yesterday. I still think he's a pretty good option. And if you're confident that he plays the next 3 and starts the next 3, like he could come off a little bit early, I'm pretty sure he's going to start the next 3. I think he's a better option if you've got the money to spend like 6.6 million. But if you don't, and you only got 5.5 or less, why not go for Almirón? He's having the time of his life right now. Newcastle are in the top 4. Everything's looking pretty rosy there. So, yeah, pretty good option, I have to say. And I cannot believe I just said that. So far this week, Gabriel Jesus has more transfers out than he has transfers in. And I don't really understand why. If you're getting rid of Jesus this week, leave me a comment below and let me know what the move is. The only things I can think of is, one, some people still don't own Haaland, in which case, fair enough, that's an absolutely great transfer. But at this point, I assume most engaged FPL managers either own him or they have rules like no Man City players or maybe no Norwegian players, so they can't bring him in. But otherwise, yes, obviously that would be a good move, but most people own him. Possibly some people are moving to Harry Kane, who has Bournemouth away and obviously has been super consistent so far this year. I don't know if that's a move that I would necessarily make this week, but fair enough if you're doing it. Otherwise, it's got to be moving funds into midfield, because I don't really see a better striker this week. He didn't pick up the yellow card in the last fixture against Southampton, so he's not suspended for Nottingham Forest at home. That is still arguably on paper the best fixture you can get this season as an attacker. Again, I know they looked like they defended really well against Liverpool, but they still gave up chances. Arsenal have been exceptional at home so far this year. And I think Jesus, I speak about this quite a bit, about players like Zaha maybe as well. The expectations for him are quite high. So when he doesn't deliver for a couple of games, people get cold feet on him. But his underlying stats, 0.5 expected goals per 90 are pretty decent. 0.17 expected assists. He's always going to get chances in that Arsenal team. I mean, 5.1 points per game is very similar to Zaha. It's less than Almirón, but obviously he's had a pretty exceptional season compared to what we were expecting. I just don't see any real good reasons to get rid before Nottingham Forest at home. Even if you're putting money into midfield, I don't know who's a massive priority this week other than maybe Saka, who's also got Nottingham Forest at home, and therefore it's probably not worth the hit or the 2 transfers this week. So there might be some people who've got team setups where it is worth getting rid of him, but for most people, just give him this Nottingham Forest game and then maybe look to get rid of him after that. So it's fair to say that Mitrović has had a pretty good season so far. 9 goals in 10 starts. It makes sense that FPL managers are still continuing to bring him in. Over 100,000 of you have brought him in so far this week. His underlying numbers continue to look pretty good. Obviously, he's much more of a goal threat. We're not expecting assists out of him, but 0.46 expected goals per 90 is pretty decent, especially when he's on the pitch for kind of 80 to 90 minutes most matches, and then you add penalties in as well. When I included Mitrović in this video, I thought I was going to go down the lines of I'm not sure if it's the right time to bring him in, because they got Man City away and Man United at home in game weeks 15 and 16, which is not necessarily ideal. But when I thought about it a bit more, especially when I looked at other forwards, I think he still does look like a pretty decent option to bring in, especially obviously when he scored 9 goals in 10 starts. The Man City away fixture is very tough. That is the hardest fixture any team is going to have all season. Obviously, if there's injuries and stuff to that Man City team, it might get a bit easier. But in general, on paper, that's the hardest fixture you're going to get. But Man United at home probably isn't that bad. I think Man United defence is improving very slowly, and they will make it difficult for Fulham. But Fulham at home, especially Mitrović there as well, always causing problems to defenders. I don't think it's that bad of a fixture, especially when you couple it with Everton at home, plus his underlying stats, plus his penalties. I know I said earlier he's not necessarily the best at them, but he's still got them in his locker. So as long as he keeps getting away with it, happy days. And obviously he's only 6.8 million. So he's pretty good. We're going to compare him to some other forwards in just a second. I think it depends when you're going to bring them in. If you're going to bring one in this week, Mitrović is probably right up there in terms of decent options. Obviously Solanke is now possibly injured as well. The only thing I would say, and I'm really not trying to scaremonger people, I'm only mentioning it because it kind of came up halfway through the Leeds game when he took a bit of a knock and people were worried about whether he was going to come back on. He does seem to be continuing to take painkillers for this foot injury that he's got. Now, he does also strike me as one of those players that's always going to play if he can. So I'm not really worried about it. I'm not looking to necessarily take him out of my team, although I might do that in game week 15. We'll have to wait and see. And I think it's okay to bring him in. But if you can, just delay that decision as late as possible so that you can hear from Marco Silva and just make sure that there's no kind of reoccurrence of that injury and that his minutes might be reduced over the next few weeks. If we then start looking at other forwards, I mean, if you're looking in and around that price point, it's very difficult to... In fact, we'll go 8 million instead, and we'll actually look at forwards instead of the Arsenal team. There's a few players in there you could look at. So Tony... Wolves away and Nottingham Forest away, definitely two better fixtures than what Mitrović has over game weeks 14 and 15. But then he still has to play Man City away as well. So obviously Mitrović has got that in game week 15. Tony has that in 16. So you could look at Tony instead, but he is on 4 yellows. That does worry me a little bit. I'm sure he's doing his best to not pick up that 5th one, but it is just something to think about. Gjertsås, we already looked at as well. I'm actually going to go for total points instead. And obviously Solanke's now injured, so you know he probably going to be out this weekend. So he's not an option. He's got Spurs at home anyway. Watkins is not someone I can kind of ever get behind because I always feel like he's frustrating to own. He does get a few chances, but just doesn't ever seem to put enough away. I know he's just got his goal, and maybe that will do his confidence the world of good, but I just don't think I can go there with Watkins. And also the fixtures are not great. Newcastle away, Brighton away, both tough. Man United at home, they're not going to make it easy either. The only kind of other players that I would look at, and they're further down the list because they've not necessarily got the minutes so far this year, is Scamacca at West Ham. But I think if you're going to bring him in this week, it's not necessarily ideal for Man United away, but if you're not desperate to do a forward move this week, you could delay the Mitrović move one more week and just get Scamacca instead in game week 15. I do think that people that have spare transfers and their team looks pretty good and they've got nothing much to do, may look to do Mitrović to Scamacca in game week 15 for 2 home fixtures against Palace and Leicester, especially if you haven't got a lot of money tied up in Mitrović, which most of us probably don't at this point. So he's someone to look at. The other option, and this is like a big punt because he's not really got many minutes recently at all, and that is Calvert-Lewin. So he got 77 minutes in the last game, 72. So they're starting to build up his fitness, and hopefully he's back because he has been out for a very long time. Missed a lot of minutes last year as well. Got the goal against Crystal Palace, and Everton's fixtures are pretty good. Fulham away, Leicester at home, and Bournemouth away. If you were going to take a punt on anyone this week, and to be fair, he is still quite expensive at 7.9, he would be the one I would look at, right? I don't think Everton are going to score a huge amount of goals, but if he gets regular minutes in these matches, bearing in mind they're a week apart now, there's no midweek games for Everton because obviously, you know, the deadlines are all Saturday going forward now until the World Cup. I think he's a little bit of a punt if you wanted to go for it. So it's all going to come down to how much risk you want to take and how much money you have to spend. For 6.8 million, it's difficult to go far wrong with Mitrović, but they don't have the greatest fixtures. But then again, there's not many other standout options either. Even someone like Daka is not necessarily assured minutes every single week for Leicester. In their fixtures, they got Man City this week anyway. So there's not a huge amount of forwards out there that I really like the look of. Calvert-Lewin if you fancy a punt. Otherwise, you could look to get Scamacca instead in game week 15. Not a huge amount of other players around that price point that I would look at. Obviously, if you've got 7.9 to spend on Calvert-Lewin, you could get Gjertsås for 8 million instead. It all depends on kind of how many Arsenal players and stuff you've got. Let me know what you think about those players I've talked about in this video in the comments below. Also, let me know why you're taking out Gjertsås. I'd love to hear about that. If you've enjoyed it, give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you're new, and I'll catch you again soon.